If you've been following the series, you've probably noticed by now that I like to open these videos with a question. It's a cheap writing trick, but I think it's an effective way to get your hooks into a viewer and get them thinking about the subjects you're going to be covering in the video. I want to open this one with a question too, I just need to fill some time until the YouTube robots stop listening. Okay, just about... What the fuck is this game? Saints Row 4 has got to be one of the strangest games to ever get a AAA release. 7 years after a little street crime game, we have a game in the same series and the same continuity where you, the President of the United States, get abducted by aliens, put in the Matrix and get superpowers. How could anyone possibly think this was a good idea? And as expected, Saints Row 4 has gone down as the death point of the Saints Row series, the point where it all went wrong. So, I've been replaying these games along with making these videos. I didn't go through and play them all beforehand or anything like that. So I've been operating on my memories of this game alone. I remember hating it. I remember thinking it was a bunch of dumb nonsense, and I've added a bunch of jokes about getting to the dark times in my previous videos. I have a confession to make. I think I love this game. Trust me, no one's more shocked about this than me. I went in expecting not to like it. I remember not liking it. I said for years that I don't like this game. But something about playing through it this time, it just came together and it clicked for me. I looked into the Matrix code and I saw the universe. Saints Row 4 is an exceptionally dumb game, but it's exceptionally clever in its dumbness, and it comes together to make something that is extraordinarily fun, and I would even argue, better than Saints Row the 3rd. Oh boy, Kyle's controversial corner is back, baby, it's been too long. So let's ask the real question to start this video. What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. No more. Like all of the Saints Row games, Saints Row 4 starts in a way that's highly symbolic of the game to come, because this time we're starting with a parody of Call of Duty. The game assumes that Saving Shonda is the canonical ending, and as such, Cyrus Temple has defected from America, joined a terrorist cell in Pakistan, and is planning to nuke Washington DC. Well, actually, it starts with an English lady poetically retelling the story of the Saints over the visual of a guy in power armour sitting on a big throne, but then we cut to the Call of Duty thing. Saints Row the 3rd was aiming for comedy, but it's not quite fair to call it parody. It was just a crime simulator with a bunch of jokes in it. Saints Row 4 actually does get into parody, but GTA isn't actually this thing it sets its sight on. In fact, more than anything, it's a parody of Mass Effect.
Hey Kinsey, you wanna fuck?
Let's go.
But there's a long list of things that this game is going to take a swing at. Mass Effect, Call of Duty, The Matrix, They Live, Metal Gear, Streets of Rage, 1950s sitcoms, Saints Row itself, and the concept of America. But we start with tactical gear, espionage, and sneaking up on Arabic terrorist dudes to knife them in the back. If you're searching for any kind of political angle on that, don't. This game is clearly including this stuff only as an allusion to the way that modern war shooters like Call of Duty handle these things. Everything from the guns you're shooting to the setup of the story to the layout of the mission is designed to make fun of Call of Duty's self-serious approach to all of this. Cyrus Temple fits right into that typical Call of Duty antagonist role, where some white special forces dude is secretly behind everything because he hates America, like General Shepard or Rourke or another one probably. It's been a while since I played Call of Duty. Aesthetically, we're so far away from anything the series has done before that the first time through it's almost insane to think that this is even the same game series. And spoilers, that's going to be true for the whole game. If you're looking for Saints Row the crime simulator, that's out the window. On a second run through though, you can start to appreciate what they're doing with this game and why they chose to move so far away from the previous games. Why open the game with a Call of Duty parody? Well, because it's funny, that's why. By leaning on parody and absurdism instead of crassness and edginess, Saints Row 4's humour has aged much more gracefully than Saints Row the 3rd. The game is a comedy first, and everything else second. Saints Row the 3rd was aiming for fun, but Saints Row 4 is just trying to make you laugh, and it's pretty good at it too. Parody is very common in other forms of media, but parody games, especially big budget parody games, are very rare, and in 2013, almost unheard of. In 2013, and largely to this day, Call of Duty is the face of AAA gaming, and there were many developers who tried to cash in on the modern warfare trend, Resident Evil 5 being a famous example. And there's plenty to make fun of in this trend, tropes and mission design that was becoming stale in 2013, let alone now. Taking aim at Call of Duty first is a statement of intention. This game is a parody of AAA gaming itself. And yet, It's still a sequel to Saints Row the Third. We're still after the same guy with the same cast. Shaundi and Pierce are along for the ride, and even in this wildly different setting, they're exactly the same as they were in the last game. A change in genre has not changed them as characters. You also meet up with a new character, an MI6 agent named Asha Odekar, who serves to contrast with the Saints. This modern warfare stuff is her world, and the Saints don't fit in it. The mission itself has almost nothing to do with the rest of the game. Its role in the story is almost entirely atmosphere building. Even in a situation as serious as this, we're taking nothing seriously. Cyrus launches the nuke and the boss jumps aboard, tearing out panels as the crew says their heartfelt goodbyes.
Well, we just met, but, you seem to know. Nice.
Then the nuke explodes, the boss gives a thumbs up to the camera and lands in the Oval Office, just in case you thought we had any rails left to stay on. 5 years later, and the boss is now President of the United States. All of the Saints are your staff, as well as Ben King from Saints Row 1 acting as your Chief of Staff, and Keith David, as played by Keith David, as your Vice President. But you don't get to bask in the glory for long, because Earth is invaded by an alien empire called the Zin, led by a guy called Zinyak, who abducts you and all of your staff and sticks them all in simulations of their worst nightmares. Now we're in the thick of it, the make or break moment for this game. Yes, we're doing aliens. This isn't a joke. Well, it is a joke, but not that kind of joke. The joke is that we're really doing aliens. The Zin are treated completely seriously as a threat for the whole game. This is what we're doing. Can you deal with that? It's very rare for a franchise to change genre like this, and this game only came out 2 years after Saints Row the Third. The whiplash between these games was too much for a lot of people, including myself. I thought this game was bad for years, and maybe so wildly changing things between games is bad. I don't know the answer to that. If we examine Saints Row 4 on its own merits, however, then the Zin are an excellent villain, and Zinyak may just be the best antagonist in the whole series. All of the previous games have a roster of villains, but by focusing on just one, Zinyak has much more presence in the game than any previous antagonist. He's not a complex villain, he's a megalomaniacal intergalactic conqueror with a god complex and a love of quoting Shakespeare. But that's all this story needs, a charismatic bad guy to punch in the face. The Zin are a genuine, unrelenting threat. You're always going to be the underdog against them. They have advanced technology and an endless army of loyal soldiers. You're just the same group of misfits you've always been, and that's one of the game's biggest, strangest strengths. Some have argued that Saints Row 4 is so different that it should have just been a different game, a new IP, but what makes all this weirdness work so well is that you still have a grounding to reality in the characters around you. You know these people, and they're the same they've always been. Seeing what happens when you take these characters from a street-level crime simulator to a sci-fi action parody is kind of fascinating. They can all acknowledge that things have gotten a little bit weird, but they're still living in this world and they're going to take the problem seriously. Why is this the right group to save humanity? Why not this group? Besides, the setup of simulated nightmares only has its full impact if you know the characters whose nightmares you're entering. Despite being a parody, Saints Row 4 actually tells a much more cohesive story than Saints Row the Third. It just happens to be about an alien empire imprisoning you in the Matrix. It's a tough hurdle to cross, I won't deny that, but if you can manage it, then this setup provides some of the most fun and silly nonsense it's possible to have in a game. The first nightmare we get to see is the bosses, and it turns out that the boss's biggest fear is being trapped in a 1950s sitcom. Obnoxiously cheery music plays and every line of dialogue is punctuated with a laugh track. The boss as a character has once again been changed, though this time it's more a change in framing than personality. Saints Row the Third was dedicated to making the player, and by extension the boss, the biggest badass in the world. Everything you did was supposed to be understood as awesome. Here in this game, you're no longer the ultimate badass. You're still a badass, but not the only badass in the room. And as such, the game is much more comfortable with letting the boss be the butt of jokes. Their characterization in this game is kind of a blunt force of nature. They're a bit dense and don't think things out very hard. They would much rather solve every problem with a punch or a rocket launcher, but they're also extremely loyal and will do anything to protect their friends. They are here, more than any other game in the series, a likeable protagonist. A 50s sitcom might seem like a strange place to dump this character, but I actually think it works quite well. It's more of a hell for the player than it is for the character, a world of wholesome, family-friendly entertainment with dull slice-of-life drama. This is not why you boot up Central 4, so of course, Kinsey hacks you in a rocket launcher. Because of the technology focus of this game, Kinsey's importance has been increased tenfold. She, along with a redeemed Matt Miller and a rogue AI called Sid, are the only characters in the game who actually understand all this simulation stuff and how to control it. It's kind of interesting, honestly, how more than any other character, her pre-established skill set from the previous game means she thrives in this new genre. She helps you escape, but Zinyak creates a new, bigger simulation for you instead, a recreation of Steelport where the Saints have no power. All of their shops have been replaced with Planet Zin, all of their cribs are destroyed, and a massive mothership hangs over the city at all times. It's not quite as ironic a prison as the 50s sitcom, but it serves as a good open world for this game. Arguably a better one than it did in Saints Row the Third. There's another reason this game wasn't well received. The OG fans were annoyed because it seemed like a betrayal of the original games with its genre flip, but the newer fans of Saints Row the Third were annoyed because of a perceived cheapness around this game, and that comes down to the game's origins. Saints Row 4 started development as an extra-large DLC pack for Saints Row the Third called Enter the Dominatrix, which would have seen the boss being trapped in a simulation and getting superpowers. Eventually the idea would spiral out enough that it warranted a full release, but that legacy of just being a Saints Row the Third expansion pack remains, even though Saints Row 4 is a larger game than the third by a fair margin. The game does reuse a ton of assets from the previous game, and the entire open world is largely the same except for the Zin additions. It's closer in spirit to Borderlands the pre-sequel than Borderlands 3, and it got criticised for the same reasons. This is a criticism that views the game as a product and not as art, and here, 10 years after the fact, it's much easier to do the latter. Steelport is one of the most boring open-world cities in the entire genre. It's a city completely without personality. There is one alleyway, the first one you see in Saints Row the Third, that has character. The rest of the city is just brown box buildings and skyscrapers. It's one of the most disappointing parts of Saints Row the Third when comparing it to the previous games. It doesn't feel like a real city, it doesn't feel alive, and that exact quality that makes it so bland in Saints Row the Third makes it perfect for Saints Row 4. Here, it actually is a fake city. The game has lots of added visual effects like messing up brick textures or pedestrians and buildings glitching in and out of existence, so that you never forget that everything around you is a simulation. The alien structures look completely out of place, but in a way that actually makes sense and actually does make the open world more interesting to navigate. The bland, featureless environment is now a feature. It makes the alien additions more obvious. This is a prison meant to break you, but you can break it instead. The sky and time of day is now dictated by story progression. It starts out as orange and harsh and alien. As you take the fight more to Zinyak, it becomes a more natural moonlight until by the end of the game it's daylight. It may be the same city as Saints Row the Third, without even any of the major additions like Saints Row 2 did for the original, but it uses the settings so much better than the previous game, especially with how you navigate the city, at high speed and from the sky. It doesn't matter that the city is less detailed and less distinct when you're mostly going to be seeing it at 100 miles per hour barreling down the street. More detail would actually be distracting. I realise this is a real backhanded compliment, but it's true nonetheless. Steelport in this game isn't supposed to be anything more than a playground. None of the buildings matter and none of the people matter. There is no environmental storytelling to be done aside from Zinyak's propaganda all around. As a product, sure, it's lazy to just reuse the entire city mostly unchanged, but it's clear that they just put all of that development into other parts of the game. Tons of new activities and making every single main story mission feel like a massive spectacle and event. In Saints Row 2, the city was important. In Saints Row 4, everything is secondary to gameplay and humour. It doesn't take too long before Kinsey's able to get you out of the simulation, and Matrix style you wake up naked and covered in goo. Unlike the Matrix, you've got to fight your way out laser gun in hand. This bears a striking resemblance to a mission I complained about in Saints Row the Third, so I guess that's worth discussing. In Saints Row the Third, you wake up naked and drugged because you've been sold as a sex slave, which is gross because it's uncomfortably close to the experience of a real-life sex trafficking victim. Here, it's because you've been abducted by aliens who had you in a mind prison. Big difference there. We're at much less risk of triggering someone's PTSD. Moving away from the real and gritty issues allows this game's over-the-top nonsense to age much more gracefully than its predecessor. When Kinsey finally gets to you, she's accompanied by Keith David, and the scene plays out almost exactly like the opening of Mass Effect 3, which is obviously intentional because Keith David is here. It's the scene right after this though, where the game really clicked for me. The boss storms up to the bridge and asks to fly. Kinsey is annoyed that they didn't even say thank you, so the boss gives a sincere thank you, still naked and covered in goo. Then you get to control the spaceship and fly out of there.
Kinsey, does this thing have a radio?
Radio signals bounce around space for...
This is my jam!
No more. Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. No more.
A year before Guardians of the Galaxy, Saints Row 4 was perfectly capturing the vibe of that movie. When we got a Guardians of the Galaxy video game, they basically recreated the scene in its entirety. They just used Iran instead. The mix of genuine emotion, stupid, kind of immature humour, ridiculous visuals, and classic pop music all came together for me, and the game just clicked. I get it. I understand why they did this. I've seen a crime simulator before. GTA 5 came out the same year as this game, and Watch Dogs less than a year later. I've never seen a game that does what Saints Row 4 does. The way it commits to every creative decision 100%, pushing absurdity as far as you can possibly push it, while still, somehow, managing to land some genuine emotional beats. The game shouldn't work, and for a lot of people it doesn't work. But if you can pick up what Saints Row 4 is putting down, there's nothing quite like it. And then this happens.
It's all gone.
Well, I'd say this was a productive day.
You're a fucking monster.
Oh, don't act surprised. I told you this would happen.
You killed 7 billion people.
Whoops.
We're done talking.
So much for Saints Row being a prequel to Red Faction. There are a rare few pieces of media that literally blow up the earth on screen, but Saints Row 4 joins that list. It takes a lot of guts as a writer to destroy Earth in the first acts of your story, and it takes a lot of skill to have that land as a genuine emotional beat in a parody comedy game. It completely changes the course of the narrative. It's not about saving Earth. Earth is gone. This is purely about revenge. And despite it all, that fits Saints Row a little better. The first time I played this game, I had no idea this was coming. Even as weird and silly as Saints Row 4 is, it's just not the kind of thing you expect to see. And I hated it. I thought it was so dumb. What are the stakes? You've already lost. How can I be expected to care about anything when the Earth is literally blowing up? Now I see that that's kind of the point. With the Earth gone, there's no rush. Everything you do is player driven. The story can be as slow as it wants because the player is the active element in the story, not Zinyak. You're taking the fight to him, always on the offense. And when the minute-to-minute gameplay is this good, you've got plenty of reasons to take your time. Here's a basic fact for you. Having superpowers is fun. That could be enough to make this game work, but Saints Row 4 puts in the work to make these superpowers feel fluid and functional while still offering a decent level of challenge and engagement to the combat if you're looking for it. The game builds on the solid bedrock mechanics of Saints Row the Third and creates something that's truly spectacular. The traversal powers are the ones you're going to be using the most often. You've got super speed, a super jump, and an unlockable glide, so you can't actually fly, but you can glide across most of the map if you gain enough height. It feels excellent. I don't think I've ever seen a game that does super speed as well as Saints Row 4 does, and the act of travel is gamified in of itself with the addition of clusters all over the map. These blue glowy orbs which you can use to purchase upgrades for your powers. It's an idea ripped straight from Crackdown, but it worked there and it works here for the same reason. Because it's mechanically based on the same system as Saints Row the Third, you can drive cars and fly planes, but outside of a few mission objectives you'd be silly to ever actually do it. Running and jumping is faster and significantly more fun. The very active moving around the map in Saints Row 4 is a breeze. So, what about the combat? The basic shooting rhythms are the same, but your grenades have been replaced by a radial menu of 4 distinct superpowers. You have a basic ice blast that can freeze enemies, you have telekinesis to pick up people, cars, and objects and throw them around, a stomp that pushes enemies away, and then an aura which causes you to erupt in flames and set bullets on fire. These are all fun, but what makes it better is that each power has its own separate cooldown timer, which means you can mix and match your powers for greater results. Freeze a group of enemies and then stomp them to instantly shatter them all at once. Each power also has 3 different elemental types that can be unlocked for even greater and weirder variation, like a version of the stomp that shrinks everyone it hits into tiny versions of themselves that you can squish by walking over. You have all the same classes of guns available, but with a bunch of extremely weird and creative variants made possible because of the simulated nature of the world, like the inflator ray that makes people's heads expand and then explode, or the black hole launcher that launches black holes, or, of course, the dubstep gun. Player freedom is at the heart of all of this, drowning the player in options for how to handle any combat situation, and to go along with that, the game has many more open world situations based around the combat. Along with the simple groups of enemies to take down, there's also hotspots, bigger base type locations that require taking down multiple shield generators to conquer, and wave-based defense activities where you need to inject a virus into the simulation. The Zin are the only faction of enemies in the game for the most part. Some missions bring back gangs from the previous games to fight, but the Zin also have much more enemy variation than any previous game. There's the basic grunts, a slightly tougher, superpowered version with some of your abilities, killer death robots straight out of Terminator, the CIDs that shield enemies and revive the dead, these big roly turret boys, and if you really piss them off, the wardens, big brutes with all of your powers and a shield that can only be taken down with your powers. Notoriety has been reworked as well. When you get into a fight, it all escalates until the warden shows up, and when you kill the warden, all of your notoriety is cleared. You can also run and catch the golden CID if you aren't looking for a boss fight. This system is excellent. If you aren't looking for a firefight, then you can simply run off and catch this thing, but if you are, you can dig in and get a boss fight for your troubles. Even the way you regain health has been reworked. Instead of just hiding until it regenerates, health is regained from health packs dropped by dead enemies, so if you want to stay in the fight, you've got to stay aggressive. It's all simply excellent and makes for some of the most fun it's possible to have in any open world game. The side activities are back from the previous games too, and they're fine. There's several new ones based around the simulation and your superpowers, but they're no longer the star. Just the minute-to-minute gameplay is the star, and it's always a shame when the game contrives to take your powers away from you, even if it does make more sense narratively to do it that way. Each of your friends is trapped in their own personal nightmare simulation, and since your powers only work in your own simulation, you'll have to play by the rules of whichever simulation you're in. The nightmare simulations are worth it though, because each one of them is an entirely separate experience, blending different visuals, level design, and in a couple of instances, gameplay itself. The first person you rescue is Matt Miller, as his experience is going to be required with all the hacking you need to do, and his simulation starts as a flashback to his own cyberspace back in Saints Row III. When you find him himself, he's trapped in his own worst nightmare, a text-based adventure game. Shondi's next, and her simulation is the most actually horrific of the bunch, going all in on surreal visuals. Her nightmare is the day Johnny died on the plane, and you find her mourning over his body, only for it to come alive as a zombie and for her to stab it to death repeatedly. Then her mind fractures, and you end up in a different nightmare, the club back in Saints Row 2, where she's being held hostage by a veteran child. The game acknowledges the difference between Shondi and Saints Row 2 and the third by just making that difference literal. There's two Shondis now, and they don't really like each other. Ash's simulation is the one that could be the least interesting since she's a new character, but the game makes it fun anyway by having the whole thing be a parody of Metal Gear and Splinter Cell and other stealth spy games, with mechanics where you have to shoot out lights before you kill the guards for absolutely no reason, and the villain of the simulation is you with an eye patch and an evil goatee. Pierce's simulation, on the other hand, is just exceptionally silly. He's being attacked by a swarm of angry Saints Flow cans and a massive angry can named Paul, who you fight by taking control of a statue. Ben King's simulation is a flashback to Saints Row 1, back to the old church and the Vice Kings, reliving the day that the Vice Kings betrayed him. You actually walk down the street in a little recreation of the beginning of the first game. Even out here in space, with the Earth a speck of dust, we're still maintaining that rigorous commitment to continuity. The final friend to rescue is the big reveal. Johnny Gat didn't die in Saints Row III after all. He was kidnapped by Zinyak, and he's been trapped in his hell for years because Zinyak viewed him as the biggest threat. His hell is the strangest by far, a full-on recreation of Streets of Rage, where he relives the day that Aisha is killed, always unable to save her. It's not a little moment either, it's a full-on section with 2 screens and 2 boss fights. The variation in these simulations is seriously impressive, and your first time through, you really have no idea what to expect when you walk into them. They're so playful, not just with the visuals, but with the game itself, including meta-humor about games as a medium. There's even one more nightmare later in the game, when Keith David is put back in his, and his nightmare is the most on the nose, because it's being stuck in an eternal fight scene with Roddy Piper in the movie They Live. The signposts around the simulation were already a clear reference to They Live, but just actually going into the movie makes it all the more funny. Keith David's whole place in the game is a joke, obviously, because he's voiced Julius in the first 2 games, which all of the characters point out, but then Julius also shows up in the game, voiced by Keith David, and they have a chat with each other.
So, Keith David. I'm a fan. Thank you. That's very kind. You know, some folks say I remind them of you. Yeah, I get the same with you. I don't see it though. Me neither.
He's also the only crewmate that will not have sex with you if you ask.
You're the president. I'm the vice president. You're the boss of the Saints. I'm just one of your crew. You've taken over cities and toppled rival gangs. I've conquered Hollywood and have a name to uphold. It just wouldn't work between us, you see?
The press X to romance is the obvious Mass Effect reference, but the deeper one is that along with everyone having their simulation mission, they also have a loyalty mission. Mass Effect 3 didn't bother, but we can have them here instead, right? They're all less involved in the simulations, but still have a lot of fun and genuine character moments. Pierce and the boss have another radio sing-along, only for it to be ruined by Zinyak. Johnny and the boss have a heart-to-heart as the boss fills him in on everything he missed. Shaundi comes to term with her older self, and the two work together to stop Veteran Child once and for all. Also, there's the one where Tanya from Saints Row 1 unleashes a virus that turns civilians into sex workers. Including you. At least she's a consistent disaster. The game's sincerity in these loyalty missions really does capture the exact same energy that it does in Mass Effect. You care about these people and this crew, even in this insane situation. All of the emotion is heightened and silly in line with the rest of the game, but consistency allows the game to land some genuine moments.
Saving Gat is a terrible idea.
The fuck's got into you?
You're out of line!
Boss don't answer to you, honey. Bitch, you lucky we're standing in front of Keith David or...
Stop it! He's right, okay? It's a terrible idea. In order to save Johnny, we have to tap directly from our ship into his mind, and that means Zinyak's going to know exactly where we are. You're asking Matt and I to paint a target on humanity's last chance so that you can go rescue someone we've never even met. And what's even stupider is that we're going along with it. That guy you just beat the shit out of is risking everything to save your friend. And you want to know why? Because we can't save ours anymore. Oleg is dead. Viola is dead. Earth is dead. So how about you stop being a fucking asshole and say thank you for giving us the hope you'll never have?
It's not all perfect. There's a weird moment where Keith David betrays you for his own selfish gain and then decides to help you again when he sees two random Zin kicking the crap out of you. It's very odd and a little disappointing because his betrayal does have some bite to it. It's the classic Siren argument of subjugation being a better alternative to annihilation, but the game doesn't fully commit to making you kill legendary voice actor Keith David.
You don't get it. Zinyak said he can restore Earth. All I have to do is kill you.
He's lying to you.
Maybe, but there's billions of lives at stake. If he's telling the truth, what's one life for the greater good?
You sound just like Julius.
He was right.
He doesn't actually have any place in the story after his betrayal, so this is more likely because of how he's woven into the side activities. Central 4's city takeover mechanics work exactly the same as the third. Every activity in Store-Bought takes over one block of the simulation. However, lessons have been learned from the third, and these systems have been mixed around to make them feel slightly more rewarding. The upgrade app is still there and offers the exact same upgrades like extra health and ammo. However, other unlockables have been added to compensate, all of which are tied to quests. The game has a somewhat strange side quest system that more or less offers a loose framework for going through all of these side activities with the promise of a reward at the end. The narrative content of these quests is minimal, but the rewards are usually worth it, because these quests are how you unlock new elements for your superpowers and some of the weirder and more interesting weapons. There's about the same amount of activities as there was in Central the Third, but now they've been designed around a medal system of bronze, silver and gold based on how well you do the activity, with bonus rewards, usually power upgrades for getting all silvers and all golds in one instance of an activity. There are lots of series staple activities that have been cut, like drug trafficking, because they just wouldn't make sense in the setting. Instead, they've been replaced by a lot of activities revolving around your superpowers, like using telekinesis to shoot specific targets through rings, or an endless runner minigame. These activities are fully cemented as side activities now, and within the game you can never fully get the Zin out of the simulation, else you'd have no one to fight. But as time filler content, there are certainly worse ways to fill an afternoon than wrecking a fake town with telekinetic wrecking balls. We're not done with Mass Effect yet though, because the final mission in the game uses the same squad selection mechanics as the suicide mission in Mass Effect 2, and securing your loyalty with the crew even grants a slightly different ending. The ending doesn't have any surprises in mind, it's just a climax of everything that's happened so far. First you destabilize the simulation, which causes power malfunctions across the mothership, then you attack the ship itself in the real world, along the way finding some convenient power armor that gives you all of your superpowers in the real world just in time for the confrontation with Zinyak himself. ending with you decapitating and despining him Predator style, and by de facto becoming the new Emperor. When you start the game by becoming president, how do you top that? God Emperor of the universe, that's how. With all of your crew loyal, it's revealed that Zinyak has a time machine with which to go back and mess around in history, but also that he has a collection of some of the best humans in history, including our mysterious narrator, who, as it turns out, is none other than Jane Austen, which is told to us in a Marvel-style post-credit scene.
And that, my friends, is how I first met the Saints.
Central 4 is designed to be the last game in the series, and ending by becoming God Emperor is certainly a way to make that clear, if blowing up the planet didn't make that clear already. As an ending to this game, it works perfectly. As an ending to the Saints Row series, it's bizarre, obviously, but we crossed bizarre a while back. It's not a mystery why this game is so polarizing, it's one of the strangest games to ever get made, but in going back to it, I think this game may have just been ahead of its time. Yes, it's big and dumb and stupid a lot of the time, the story can be nitpicked into oblivion, but the game knows that, and whenever you think something is dumb, the game is just as likely to make a joke about it. There are 100 ways this game could have gone horribly wrong, but instead it all coalesces into something that really does work, if you can accept it for what it is. And in a fascinating bit of meta-storytelling, the developers even gave us an example of what Saints Row 4 could have been if it was handled in a much worse way.
So, what exactly is Enter the Dominatrix?
Oh man, are we really digging that up?
It was really weird.
It was amazing.
Worst idea we've ever had.
I told you that Saints Row 4 started life as a DLC pack for Saints Row the Third. Well, here we are in the DLC of Saints Row 4 with a DLC pack about the DLC pack that became Saints Row 4. Enter the Dominatrix here is an example of something we almost never see in games: cut content and deleted scenes bonus features. The entire thing is extraordinarily meta, with the characters talking about the previous games as if they're actors in a behind-the-scenes documentary, while still being exactly the same characters that they've always been. Some people have said that Saints Row 4 should have stayed as a weird little DLC for Saints Row the Third and not spun off into a full game, but this DLC feels like an explanation from the developers themselves as to why that would have been a bad idea. And if you're interested in the behind-the-scenes development of video games, this might be one of the most interesting DLCs ever made. Because Enter the Dominatrix is not good. It is in fact pretty bad. The fictional documentary framing makes it a little difficult to tell how much of what we see was the real plan for the DLC and how much has been shifted to make jokes. But even if only the broad strokes are true, Enter the Dominatrix was conceptually a bad idea, and it's very clear why they went in a different direction. It's pretty substantial for what it is, longer than any of the Saints Row the Third DLC packs by a fair margin, even in its rough cut state. But it also inherits a lot of Saints Row the Third's worst writing impulses in all of the wrong ways. The basic premise would have been that, like Saints Row 4, the Zin attack Earth, only this time you kill Zinyak in the first mission. Then, an evil AI called the Dominatrix traps the Saints in a simulation where they get superpowers and have to escape, hence the name. The Dominatrix is, well, a dominatrix, and is the horrible hybrid of a leather mummy and Maleficent, complete with dildo horns. Her army is entirely composed of people in gimp suits and, dildo tanks. It is so Saints Row the Third. It would be right at home in that game for all of the wrong reasons. It is that game's aesthetic to a T, where the idea of subdom sex work is the joke, where it's deliberately over the top in a crass and deliberately gross and sexual way. It even brings back Zemos for another gimp chariot race. Because of course it does. It is a perfect example of what makes Saints Row 4's comedy work so much better than Saints Row the Third. Here in Enter the Dominatrix, the joke is running around catching furries and throwing them in cages, or that the sports commentators are doing so over a gimp chariot race, where in Saints Row 4, the joke is that the commentators are being forced against their will to keep commentating on a sport even though Earth is gone and they hate their lives now.
I can't help but be impressed by this contestant, Zach. I feel fortunate to see this action firsthand. How about you? I said, how about you, Zach?
I can't do this! I can't do this anymore, Bobby!
Keep it together, Zach. You hate to upset our most benevolent overlord.
I miss my wife, Bobby.
So do I, Zach. So do I.
These are both equally absurd situations, but one of them has universal appeal, and one of them is only funny if you think the existence of kink is inherently funny. In the last video, I had a big tangent about Saints Row the Third's portrayal of women and how the game was clearly only designed to cater to a male audience. I haven't had that complaint with Saints Row 4 at all, because the female characters this time are treated with more respect, both by the characters and the script. Asha Odekar, for example, is another femme fatale archetype, but a much better written one. She actually does dress in combat slacks for one, and she's a more fully fleshed out character capable of emotions beyond anger. Her defining character trait isn't girl, it's spy, and that's a big difference. The Dominatrix, on the other hand, is absolutely nothing. As portrayed in this DLC, she's barely a character at all. Just a sexy leather queen who talks nothing but innuendo and wants to dominate everyone because she's evil, I guess. It is extremely obvious why she was cut in favour of Zinyak. He's also just evil, but he's evil in a fun and charismatic way that's much more interesting to watch. The Dominatrix is nothing but a gimmick and a pun, before we even get to the weird sexual assaulty undertones. The other major cut revealed in this DLC is Donnie, the soft boy mechanic from Saints Row 1 and 2. He shows up here dressed like Neo, and it's revealed that in the original draft, he's the one that would have taught you your superpowers. Not only was he in Enter the Dominatrix, but it seems as though he actually made it pretty far into development of Saints Row 4 before getting the axe. He even has audio logs which can be found in the data files. His cut is less necessary than the Dominatrix, but still ultimately for the best. As explained by the characters in the documentary, he fills the same narrative role as Kinsey and Matt, and at the end of the day, the two of them have a more interesting dynamic in a pre-existing rivalry. It wouldn't have hurt the game to have him there, but it would be overcrowding. There are other characters who didn't make the cut too. Zemos, who as mentioned shows up in this DLC as a kind of obvious cut. He's more a gimmick than a real character for the most part. But the bigger cut is Viola de Winter, who also has audio logs hidden in the files. She doesn't show up in this DLC, but it's likely that she was cut because, as I mentioned last game, she's basically the same character as Shaundi. The biggest and dumbest cut is saved for the end. After defeating the Dominatrix, Pierce shows up on a spaceship with a race of sentient talking velociraptors, and then you ride them to the exit as they sing "Everybody Do the Dinosaur."
We have to hurry! Come on! I will sing you the song of my people! Boom, boom, aka-laka-laka boom! Boom, boom, aka-laka boom, boom! Boom, boom, aka-laka-laka boom! Boom, boom, aka-laka boom, boom! Open the door, let out the door! Everybody work the dinosaur! Open the door, let out the door! Everybody...
This culminates in a recreation of the end of A New Hope on the Raptor planet for reasons. I'm not even sure how to explain why this is dumber than the things that happen in the real Saints Row 4. I think it's just that the joke is so obtuse that it actually fails to be a joke at all. A planet of sentient raptors. Okay, but why? What's the joke? That there's a planet of sentient raptors? And that's funny why? What makes this DLC so interesting despite how bad it is that the badness is a feature, not a bug. Behind the scenes looks are very common in movies, but basically non-existent in video games. And it's fascinating, to me anyway, to have a peek behind the curtain at why something failed to come together. If Enter the Dominatrix had been released as originally visualised, it would have been awful. It would have been torn to shreds by critics for being cringy, weird and bad. As meta-commentary on the process of game development and how artistic visions change, it's a fascinating little curiosity, which also serves to confirm how much more Saints Row 4 is than just the DLC pack for Saints Row the Third. Almost nothing from this original idea actually made it into the final product aside from the idea of a simulation, superpowers and aliens. And Paul, I guess.
For nearly a decade, we've watched the Saints as they rose from humble beginnings to becoming an unstoppable force of nature. In that time, we've seen how the Saints rose to power. We've seen how the Saints enact vengeance. We've even seen how the Saints united both humanity and velociraptors. But for the first time ever, I share with you their most important story yet. For this, my friends, is how the Saints saved Christmas.
So, I like to tie these videos in a nice bow at the end, figure out some way to link the final DLC with the themes and the design priorities of the base game, but, Well, it's a Christmas DLC. It's a good Christmas DLC, I like it quite a bit, but it's a strange way to end our discussion of Saints Row 4, especially as I make this at the end of May. Ironically enough, there would have been a third DLC to wrap up our discussion of this game in a much more cohesive way, but it also got big enough that the developers figured it warranted its own release, so I guess we can properly conclude this discussion next time. For now, let's try and muster up some Christmas cheer. How the Saints Save Christmas is about preventing the end of the universe because an evil version of Santa takes over the future and enslaves the whole galaxy. A version of Shondi comes from the future to explain this and help save the real Santa so that future never happens. Yes, it's basically the same as Futurama with a bit of Terminator thrown in there, but what makes this DLC work is how completely sincere it is about the whole Christmas thing. In a classic Christmas movie setup, the boss hates Christmas. They don't understand it and they think it's pointless, and over the course of the DLC they have to learn what makes Christmas magical. But this is still Saints Row 4, so that magic involves shooting a lot of evil gingerbread men. In terms of production, this is probably the most impressive DLC pack of any of the games so far. You actually go to the North Pole, and it's kind of incredible. It's this delightful little Christmas town with the decapitated heads of Santa's reindeer decorating the courtyard. One of them even has a shiny red nose and a delightfully horrible touch. How do you go to the North Pole with the Earth having been blown up? Well, that's a great question. The DLC states that, like Jane Austen, Santa was one of those historical figures that Zinyak had kidnapped, and the evil Santa, Claus, is a fractured nightmare of Santa's mind made manifest. This is the real Santa. Santa is real in Saints Row, so everything in the DLC is within the simulation. Santa's nightmare world is a world without Christmas cheer, so you have to spread that cheer to get him out of it. But then for the rest of the DLC, everyone seems to kind of forget that this is a simulation. Like, you spend a whole mission delivering presents, but to digital people, and then there's this whole rivalry with an elf named Twinkle, who it seems is a real based on the fact that he's the one who ripped Future Shondi's arm off, but everything in the DLC is definitely in the simulation because Earth is gone and we still have our superpowers. And then the joke at the very end of the DLC is that Santa wakes up naked and covered in goo on Zinyak's ship, so yeah, it was definitely in the simulation, but that doesn't make sense. How did this simulated version of Santa's evil secret identity get out into the real world and enslave the galaxy? Like, you meet Mrs. Claus, but it's not the real Mrs. Claus, right? It's in the simulation. I wouldn't point this out, but unlike other stupid things like this, the game doesn't even lampshade it. It's just something you're not supposed to think about. I'm nitpicking the logic of Santa being trapped in an alien matrix after the Earth has been destroyed. What the fuck am I doing? The true highlight of the DLC for me, and the great way to cap off the game, is one of the DLC's collectibles, Letters to Santa. You can find one written by each of the crew and give them a read on the ship computer, and they are delightful. They range from jokes like Johnny Gat just asking for a massive list of weapons and some hair gel, to entirely sincere like Ben King lamenting that he can't put out cookies for Santa this year, or Shondi wishing to give her younger self the Christmas she never had. The sweetest one of all, though, is the bosses, who simply asks for everyone else to get whatever they asked for. And a pony, because that's what you're supposed to ask for. It's exceptionally cheesy, obviously, but in the end, sincerity is what makes Saints Row 4 what it is. It fully commits to every silly idea it has, even if it's making constant jokes about the situation. Its commitment to them, even telling a weird little Christmas story, gives it just that little bit of magic. I went into this ready to dislike this game. I fully expected this to be the most negative video in the series. But it sure seems like I've gone and spent 40 minutes singing its praises, doesn't it? When I first played this game, I thought this wasn't what I wanted. I wanted Saints Row 2. I wanted a more down-to-earth game about gang violence with some silly elements. I didn't want aliens and superpowers. It's been almost 10 years since then, and that's more than enough time to reevaluate what's important to me. Saints Row 4 is so bold in its creative decisions. It could have fallen apart in a million different ways. It could have been a cringeworthy disaster like Enter the Dominatrix. And for some people, it still is that. Not for me though, not anymore. I think at the end of the day, I still like Saints Row 2 just that little bit more. But surprising everyone, especially myself, Saints Row 4 takes the number 2 spot. I'm so sorry. No one's more upset about this than me. YouTube's algorithm likes negativity a lot more than it likes praise. But to quote famous philosopher Nestor Alexander Hathaway, "Oh, I don't know. What can I do? What else can I say? It's up to you. I know we're one, just me and you. I can't go on." What is love?
Don't tease me, Your Excellency.
Let's go on a field trip.
Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my patrons for supporting the things I do. If you want to see your name up here or get access to exclusive Patreon videos, I just made one about some of my favourite game music, then you can find that in the link in the description below, as well as a like, a comment, a share, and a subscribe. You can click up here to catch up on or rewatch the rest of my Saints Row series, or if you're looking for something different, then you can click down here for this video about J.K. Rowling. Based on how well it did, you've probably already seen it, but if not, why not watch it again, or for the first time? I'm messing this up, I'm running out of energy.